Hey, lovely listener. Welcome to Goals, Grit, and Some Woo-Woo Shit. I'm your host, Una Duncan, and I'm changing the way I do things a little this holiday season. You'll notice I'm taking some time off, so I'm repurposing some previous content this month, and I'm really rethinking my goals for this upcoming year. I'm finding this year that I'm less attracted to the big achievement goals, and I'm more interested in this year really just savoring the day-to-day enjoyment and beauty of life, which is kind of not usually my jam. I usually love the striving towards the big thing. But this interview that I'm going to play you now is what really set me off on this new trajectory. You might have caught it when it first was released, but it's really worth a re-listen. Check this out.
It's time to get your head out of your ass and start creating a life of no regrets. Whether you want to lose weight, get rich, or manifest a hot threesome on the beach, you're gonna want to turn this up. This is Goals, Grit, and Some Woo-Woo Shit with your host, best-selling author and professional butt kicker, Una Duncan.
Chris Bailey, I am so happy to have you on the show. Your book has impacted me so much. And the book I'm talking about specifically is How to Calm Your Mind, because you've written 3, I believe. But let me tell you something. I'm going to start with this confession. I probably would never have picked up a book called How to Calm Your Mind. I would much more have picked up a book that's like, how to turn your mind up to 11. Like that's
how to 10x your mind.
Totally turbocharge everything in your mind. Yeah. That would have been my book, except that a friend of mine who is also very much like a type A achiever, she was like, dude, this book, it's rocking my world. You have to read it. And only because I respect her so much that I was like, okay, I'll read this shit. And right off the bat, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the book I needed. So thank you so much. And also, when I was reading it, the reason I was drawn in immediately is because I understand you kind of come from the same background. Like you probably didn't start out wanting a calmer mind.
No, why would you? I love stimulation. Don't we all? You know, and it wasn't really until that mental stimulation boiled over, especially the stress that was causing it. On stage one day, I was, going along just fine in this very, very stimulating world in my stimulating little life until I was on stage one day giving a talk on productivity. And that's when things kind of boiled over. And, I have to admit that calm was not something that I sought. It wasn't something that I sought to obtain more of in my life, unlike things like productivity and like personal development. I didn't really see it as part of that for some reason. Now my thinking has definitely changed and evolved. But I had a panic attack on stage one day and doing something that had become quite routine in my own work, which was giving talks on the subject of productivity. And this led me to think, oh, wait, if I'm experiencing this stuff, writing and speaking about productivity, maybe other people are too. And, the signs were, of course, very obvious in hindsight. I just didn't realize it at the time. I thought, the odd impending feeling of doom was just a normal part of being human. I thought, when I tensed up thinking about work on Sunday evening about the following week, that was just a normal feeling. When I had difficulty concentrating or even nausea and lightheadedness were symptoms of anxiety for me. But it wasn't until it boiled over that I had the chance to connect the dots. But right now, I sit here, grateful that I did because of what that journey led me to.
And also, just to give people context, so you are a productivity expert, and you're also not like, you were good at self-care as we understand it. Like you exercise, you did the yoga, you did the meditation, like you were on top of your shit in all the ways that people are expected to be on top of their shit.
I was on my shit. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet you had a moment, actually, one of the ones that you described that I thought, I could really picture this. You said you got to your hotel, you're prepped for your talk, and you got in the bath, and I think you were listening to a podcast in the bath, which sounds like a lovely, relaxing, like this is what people who are on top of their shit do. They relax, and that's just good self-care. But then you caught a glimpse of yourself in the drain thing, and you said, I look like shit. Is that what happened?
Yeah, that that little drain plate thing that's kind of
Yeah.
midway between the faucet and the drain, like the overflow plate. I don't know. I don't even know
Yeah.
what it's called. I
Yeah.
remember doing like a deep dive into researching what the hell is this thing called when I was writing the book. That
Right.
was like an entire day's worth of work. Welcome to my world and my weird ass job.
Productivity.
But yeah, I remember catching a glimpse of myself in that, and my face was of course warped by the curvature of the metal, but I looked kind of forlorn and sad and kind of depleted.
Mm.
And I didn't realize it at the time, but yeah, that those feelings would boil over the next day. But like you said, I thought I was good at self-care. I meditated every day. I still do. I'm a big fan of meditation for the productivity reasons alone, setting aside the mental health reasons for that. I ordered copious amounts of butter chicken when I was on the road, trying out the butter chicken in every different city. And I thought I was actually doing a pretty good job of self-care
Yeah.
at the time, doing all these things. Went to the spa with my wife,
Oh, yeah.
which I love. And
Yeah.
but still, this stress had the space to boil over after metastasizing in my life. And it made me realize that a lot of the advice that I was taking wasn't working
Mm.
like I thought it would, right? You would think meditation just absorbs all the stress in your life and prevents it from boiling over.
Yeah.
But I found that to not necessarily be the case. And sometimes self-care strategies can serve as a band-aid that I found that kind of mask the situation that we're really in temporarily without fixing some of the underlying issues that continue to come up.
And so for you, the underlying issue, you described what happened to you on stage, giving this routine talk about productivity that you've done a million times. So it's not like you had,
Yeah.
Stage fright or whatever. So you
Mhm.
described that as an anxiety attack. Is that the words that you used?
Yeah, definitely going deep into that fight, flight, or freeze mode on stage that day. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I actually heard on a podcast recently that Martha Beck is working on a book about anxiety, and she says that that is the real pandemic of our time is anxiety. Would you agree with that? Do you think everyone's kind of suffering from this low level anxiety?
It's interesting because anxiety very much is a spectrum, that goes from, high anxiety from one side all the way down to calm on the other side. And so we think, this anxiety spectrum stops at the point of no anxiety. And so we're either not anxious or highly anxious,
Right.
but we can keep going past that point of no anxiety to a deeper state of calm. And so I think, we're all on this spectrum to some level, where we have this emotional reactivity level in our life where when things happen, we have a different level of emotional reactivity versus equanimity to the events that transpire. And so we're most definitely all on that spectrum, but you're exactly right. Most of us are closer to that high anxiety portion, and we can't always identify the feelings that anxiety leads us to feel. But, if you have racing or uncontrollable thoughts, if you feel restless, if you feel on edge, if you have that difficulty concentrating, if you have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, if you have rapid heart rate or palpitations, nausea, dizziness, feelings of fear or doom impending, worrying all the time. These are all symptoms of anxiety that we're not necessarily aware of that we have, because we're akin to the fish in water, right? You know that quote. Ask a fish how the water is, and they'll ask you, "What's water?" It's kind of similar to anxiety, where because we're steeped in it, because we're steeped in how we feel, it becomes a part of our world, and we don't realize that we're viewing the world through that lens that warps the perspective of how we perceive our life and the circumstances of our life and the events of our life as they unfold inside of that container. And so I think there's a lot of truth to that idea that the levels of anxiety are through the roof because the levels of stress that we face, including the stress that we choose to pay attention to every day, are through the roof as well. So I would say there's a lot of truth to that in terms of how many of us feel anxious on a population level.
You spend a lot of time talking about what calm is, and you also define it by its opposite. And when I was thinking, I was like, why wouldn't I be interested in calm? And I was like, well, because I think my thought was that the opposite of calm was excitement and energy. And so I thought these was positive things, and calm being kind of like a meh version of that. But you're saying, no, calm is the opposite of anxiety.
Different spectrum. Different spectrum. Yeah.
So we've got this low level or maybe high level anxiety that is probably influencing us much more than we think. And you talked a little bit about some of the symptoms we might start to notice. When we get to that peak anxiety, does that lead to burnout? Is that the next step?
Yeah. So it's really interesting because this level of anxiety is typically caused by a high level of chronic stress in our life. And if you look at the research behind burnout, it shows that burnout is the result of one thing and one thing only, and that's chronic stress in our life that has not been successfully managed. And so we all have sort of a threshold of sorts where once we cross over that threshold, we accumulate enough chronic stress in our life. So chronic stress is stress that never seems to end. It's stress where there's no end in sight versus acute stress, which is once off and temporary. So, once a, traffic jam on the way to the airport when you're going off to the Dominican, it's fine. It's not great when you're in it, but the traffic ends and then you go on with your life.
You get to the Dominican.
And then you're in the Dominican, man. I mean, what's better? But the opposite of that is the chronic traffic. Maybe you have a 2-hour daily commute where you're sitting in traffic for most of the time. You download a lot of podcasts and audiobooks, but maybe that's not enough to absorb that stress. And so you have that repeated stress. And if you have enough of this repeated stress where there's no end in sight, chronic stress, it's the garbage kind of stress, we reach a point of burnout when we cross that threshold. And the interesting thing about burnout is I thought burnout was exhaustion going into this journey, right? As a lot of people do, because we use the term burnout colloquially. You'll ask how I'm doing, and if I had a long week, I'll say, oh, I'm so burnt out after that week. But the research is quite fascinating in my opinion on burnout, and it shows that there's 3 characteristics of our work that of our current situation and how we're feeling that need to be true in order for us to qualify as having burnt out. So the first one is exhaustion, and so that's in there, that's in the mix, but it only comprises a third of what it actually means to be technically burnt out. The second attribute, I don't know if you've noticed that as the stress has gone up with us all, especially over the last few years as we record this, the cynicism has gone up too. This negativity that seems to be in the air. And indeed, that's one of the 3 attributes of burnout. So exhaustion, then cynicism. And the third is feeling unproductive. It's feeling as though we don't make a difference, that our actions don't contribute to some broader goal that really, truly matters. And so exhaustion, cynicism, inefficacy, these are the 3 core attributes of burnout. We need all 3 in order to qualify as having burnt out. But it really is that chronic stress that also causes anxiety that leads us to this point. And so this is the interesting thing that was fascinating to unfold as I looked through the research and connected these disparate fields, or at least fields that felt disparate at the beginning, is, anxiety, burnout, they don't seem that connected. But when you look at the underlying factors, especially chronic stress that never seems to let up, especially the chronic stress that comes from the 6 areas of our work that tends to cause burnout the most, which we can talk about if you want.
Would you mind going over them? Because I thought they were really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So it's, I felt like, I don't know if you've watched, what's that show? It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where they have like the map, or any crime show really, where, they have a map attached
with the
to
strings?
like pieces of string. Yeah. That was what my office was like during this project, piecing together all this research. And these 6 burnout factors are absolutely fascinating. And it shows that the chronic stress that we experience in our work it tends to come from 6 main places. So you can think of these 6 areas as sort of petri dishes that the stress we face tends to metastasize inside of. So the first is workload, right? Workload. When our workload is too damn high, we experience chronic stress because we feel as though we can never catch up, and that constant time pressure, that constant pressure we put on ourselves, and it comes from the external as well, it causes chronic stress. Number 2, lack of control with when, where, and how we work on things. And so the less control we have, the more stress we face, the more likely we are to burn out. Insufficient reward is number 3. So of course this is money, right? And the inflation's high, we feel like we're not being paid enough. There's stress that comes with that, but it's also being just recognized for the contributions we make. If we're working our ass off day in, day out, every single day, and nobody ever says that, hey, thank you for the work that you do, we're going to feel stress from that side of it too. That's why if you're a manager in a management position in any capacity, one of the best things you can do is give genuine praise to the people in your team. It not only helps them feel good, which is a reason to do it in and of itself, but it also helps them become more engaged and less burnt out. So workload, lack of control, insufficient reward. Community is number 4. It's how close we feel to the people we work alongside. The more combative things are, the more stress we face because of the people we work with, the more likely we are to burn out. Fairness is the 5th factor. So we need to feel as though things are fundamentally fair in the work we do, how we're paid, how work is assigned, how we're managed in every single way. And values is the final factor. And so values are they seem wishy-washy, but they're the most interesting part of this to me, where when we feel as though we're working in a way that's true to what we value. So if we value cooperation, for an example, and we get to participate in collaborative teamwork with the people that we love, we're going to feel like our work is not only something that we love and a passion, but an extension of who we are. Right? When we can observe ourselves manifesting our values, there's some woo-woo word, manifesting our values through our actions. That's the process through which meaning is made at work, in our life in general. But when there's a mismatch, and so we value cooperation, but we're in this like finance firm, maybe that's ruthless, it's competitive, people are, nipping at each other's heels and cutting each other down. And, use the analogy you want, we're going to experience stress from that too. So the idea is the more stress we experience from these 6 factors because of a mismatch with our work, the more stress we face, the more likely we are to burn out. And if you're feeling this is the key, just in case people don't pick up the book. If you're feeling some combination of exhausted, cynical, unproductive, look at those 6 areas one by one, pick it apart, work within the autonomy that you have to overcome and tame some of that chronic stress, because it's so worthwhile, especially when you consider that the opposite of burnout is engagement.
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting. It's not, what did I think the opposite of burnout was? I don't know. I guess relaxation. Oh, actually, I want to follow up on this burnout, but I want to make sure we get to this because I thought it was so interesting. And I'm like everyone else. I don't do the exercises in self-help books, but I did this one. So Chris said, ask yourself, what is the definition of a good day? And he was like, pause the audiobook and actually think about it. But I didn't have to pause. I knew immediately. I was like, oh, if I checked off everything on my to-do list, that is exactly what I make a good day. And you said that's one way to define it, but here's some other ways. And I thought it was such an illuminating exercise. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then I'm going to bring you back to burnout.
Yeah, for sure. So the idea is, there's an infinite number of ways to determine whether a day went well. We can look at how happy was I today? We can look at how much did I contribute? We can look at how much did I connect with the people that I love and care about. We can look at how deep are my relationships. But we live in an environment that cares a lot about how much we accomplish. And, there's a large part of Western culture is built around the pursuit of more accomplishment and just more in general. You look at what people pursue through how they spend their time every day. And people spend a lot of time trying to obtain more of the various currencies of their life. More followers, more status, more money, more projection of status, because usually the more status somebody projects, the less money they actually have, because you can only see what people spend, right? And it's fascinating. But if you ask that question, it ultimately usually comes back to how productive was I over the course of the day? Because guilt comes into play here too, right? Where we want to assuage ourselves of any of the guilt that we happen to feel from being less productive than is expected of us and that we expect of ourselves. And so when you ask this question, despite the myriad of different values that we can have, despite all the different currencies that we can try to optimize for in our life, the way that we measure our days, the default is how much we accomplish, because that allows us to minimize the guilt we feel with how we spend our time. And it allows us to, kind of live within the expectations of the culture that we reside inside of. And I'm not arguing against, contributing more and accomplishing more, especially when, that's connected with what you value and what you truly care about. But ultimately, when you look at, again, that process through which meaning is made, which is when we manifest our values through our actions, we're leaving a lot of potential meaning on the table when we construct our days around this pursuit of more accomplishment and more of the various currencies of our life. Let's say you value, maybe you might value universalism, which is one of the 10 fundamental human values. It's understanding, appreciating, tolerating, and protecting the welfare of people and of nature. So there's 10 fundamental human values. So let's say that is your biggest value out of the 10, and your days are constructed around accomplishment. When it comes to maximizing how meaningful your day is, it's not necessarily the best path. And this is not to pile on the guilt. We have enough guilt from the various places in our life, including especially from expectation. But it's worth considering whether our days are constructed around the pursuit of what we truly value or what the world values, and whether there's a mismatch there in the first place. It's such a fascinating idea that we accept the defaults instead of reflecting on who we are, what we want, and how we can get there.
Yeah. So in this podcast, we talk about setting and achieving goals, but you say that you want to put some boundaries on your goals. Otherwise, you're just falling into the trap of always wanting more. Did I get that right? Yeah. And if so, how do we make sure that our ambitions have boundaries that lead to personal growth and not just burnout and constant dissatisfaction?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because the pursuit of more, we see it in various people, can be a very slippery slope, where the idea of more is self-reinforcing. First of all, it's constructed on dopamine. And so when we obtain more of what we already have, we get a hit of dopamine, which is a neurochemical that leads us to feel as though pleasure is right around the corner, but doesn't necessarily lead us to pleasure in and of itself. And so it's fascinating, because we feel kind of like we're on a treadmill, constantly chasing the next hit, whether in the form of more accomplishment or more of anything really, or stimulation. And so this was something that I found early on, is creating boundaries around this pursuit of more is incredibly helpful, not only for productivity, but also for happiness. I just call them my productivity hours. And so at the start of the day, I choose how many productivity hours I'll have and when they'll occur. So mind you, I have a lot of autonomy. So, your hours might be determined by somebody else, like between the hours of 9 to 5, maybe 1 hour afterward for connecting in the evening, for example. And essentially, these are the hours in which you care about accomplishment, where you care about reaching the goals that you set. You care about, just how productive you are in these hours. And you get to also, by the way, compartmentalize the chronic stress that's associated with work when you compartmentalize things into these hours. But essentially, that idea of chronic stress not having an end in sight, it turns that chronic stress of work, when we engage with it repeatedly, into acute stress, because we know there's an end to these productivity hours every day. So we have the deadline effect, we have the end in sight, and we get to balance this striving for more of the various currencies in our life, to savoring what we have, to reflecting on our values, to living more in accordance with them. And so it's a simple strategy, but it lets us strike that balance between striving and savoring that I think is so critical. And the way that I like to set goals within these hours, my favorite ritual is the rule of 3. And so, there's a lot of rituals for planning out our day and whatnot. But the one that I've found, and I've been researching productivity for quite some time now, and I've written a few books about the topic as well. So the best one, the stickiest one I found, is the rule of 3. And it goes like this. At the start of the day, you fast forward to the end of the day in your head, and you ask yourself, by the time this day is done, what 3 main things will I want to have accomplished? And that's it. And you can only choose 3. And so you have to choose, in addition to what you want to accomplish, everything that you don't prioritize. And so you really have to step back and go to basics, go to the essentials, and decide what's important on a daily basis. And it works because there's actual science behind how we think in 3s. We naturally chunk things together into 3s by default. And you can look no further than to the world around us to see that examples of this abound, right? We have sayings like, good things come in 3s, celebrities die in 3s, the third time's the charm.
Right.
Even a story, a sequence of hundreds of events, the beginning, the middle, and the end. The Olympics, gold, silver, bronze, the 3 little bears, 3 blind mice, the 3 little pigs, the 3 musketeers. I mean, the
Holy Trinity.
There could be the Holy Trinity, the 3 wise men. There could be a terrible rap song written about how we, these 3s, kind of like a "we didn't start the fire," maybe. No,
there you go. Get on it, Chris.
This idea immediately. No, I'm scrapping this idea immediately.
It ends here.
Yeah, it started here and it ends here. But essentially, the rule fits with how we think, which is the beauty of it. It forces us to prioritize. And we have the deadline with the productivity hours. We can look at how limited time we have every day. We can look at our energy and our attention, and we can there's beauty in this ritual, because it makes our day about what we wish to accomplish rather than what we have to.
Okay, I love this. And you know what? I'm going to take advantage of the fact that you're on my podcast, because I want some personal coaching here for a second, because I feel...
Let's do it. Let's do it up. Yeah.
So I can get that. But I feel like if I look at my whole day, I will look at my work day and be like, 1, 2, 3, here are the things I want to accomplish. But then when those productivity hours are over, then I would switch into mom mode. Here are the things I want to accomplish in mom mode. And I have my, workouts. Here are the things I want to accomplish. And it still feels like I'm accomplishing all day long. And then there's a certain fiction book that I want to read. I guess what I'm wondering is, should I have more boundaries than that? Or is that kind of what you're thinking, that you compartmentalize your life and then you have productivity hours for each section?
I think we need hours, and sometimes this is a luxury, but we need hours that are free. And this is what I love about the productivity hours idea is we need productivity hours for work and for home. And, some of us need more productivity hours at home than others.
Yeah.
And, we might, maybe we're so busy that every single moment except for 1 hour of our day is a productivity hour.
Yeah.
But I think the key is that we allow for space in our day where intentions have space to form, where they're not determined by some previous version of ourselves. And so there's a serendipity to these hours. There's there's sort of an extemporaneous nature to them. And so when we feel as though what we have to do in a given moment is defined for us by some previous version of us, or from some external person, like a boss, like a client, we feel as though we're more likely to feel as though those hours are work, right? Because it's predetermined. But when we're able to allow intentions to form in the moment, and this can be, I think a good illustration of this is music. There are sometimes when we're working, and so we'll say, okay, I'm going to put on my working playlist. But then there are the times when we have a bit more space where we think, okay, I don't know what I want to listen to right now. I know I want to listen to music. And so we can wait for a song to come up in our mind. And it might be some obscure song or album we haven't listened to in years. And we can enjoy that so much more because the song becomes an expression of what we wish to experience in that moment, because we we create a container in which that intention can form. And, there's a big difference I find in my own experiences in terms of how much I enjoy the predetermined music versus the in the moment music. And I think life should be like that too. We fall into patterns, we fall into routines, and we think we don't have much time, but the average person watches around 4 hours of TV every day, which is a lot of time. And so maybe even just one of those hours, sitting on the couch and waiting for an intention to form. Maybe we don't have a lot of time like this, but we probably have a bit of time that isn't a productivity hour where we can allow this to happen. And it lets us recharge. It lets us experience a bit of serendipity in our life. It lets us experience what we truly wish to experience in the moment. And I think there's a certain gift we can give to ourselves through that.
I love that. So now I want to take you back to burnout. You said that the first step might be, if you feel like you might be experiencing some anxiety. And so you might look at these 6 factors of burnout, like, the volume of work, the amount of control you have about how you're doing it, the fairness that you're experiencing in your office, the recognition, things like that. So you might look at these and say, okay, what can I control? Now, is that what you did? Like, take us from that moment you saw yourself in that reflecty thing that no one looks good in. So you got to give yourself some leeway here. But so you saw that and you were like, I need to make some changes in my life. And so did you systematically go through these 6 things, or what did you do?
Well, it took a while to stumble upon this research. Frankly, I wish I had these 6 things available to me at the time. But I went through quite systematically, and the crappy thing, the shitty. I guess I could swear because there's shit in the name of the show.
Yes, you can.
The shitty thing at the time is, we don't have complete control over most of these factors.
Yeah,
and so this is as much of a matter of fit as it is a matter of control. And so values is a really good example. You're probably not going to change the values of the organization that you work for. Fairness is another factor. Maybe you have a bit of leeway to make inroads in that direction, but you're probably not going to change how fair things are overnight. Maybe you are. Who knows? Reward is quite similar. And so it's as much of a function of a reflection of how good of a fit your job is for you, as what you have control over. And by all means, it's worth fighting for fairness within the autonomy that we have. So workload is a great example. We can talk to our manager or whomever we directly report to and say, I'm not as productive as I could be right now. Indeed, inefficacy is it's a core dimension of burnout. And so, I'm exhausted, I'm stressed. What is most important that's on my plate so that I can eliminate what's not, because I'm experiencing a level of chronic stress that's too high, and it's causing me, anxiety, but it's also affecting my performance. And so I think, making it a question of performance rather than burnout is critical here, because there's a common narrative around burnout, which is wrong, by the way, but there's a common narrative that when we're burnt out, we should just suck it up because, just tough it out.
Or go on a vacation for a week, go to the Dominican for a week, come back refreshed, and then figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Even though, the same problems will be waiting for you when you return. It's just, it's a function of these 6 factors, what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Sorry, you asked about me. So I went through very quickly. I went through the 6 factors.
No, I love that. You have such an impulse to give. It's great. But I do want to hear about you, because I know that you didn't just tackle those. You also tackled, I think you call it a dopaminergic tendency. Can you tell us about dopamine and your stimulation fast?
Yes. So one of the most powerful ways that I found in terms of lowering that dopamine level of my mind was indeed that stimulation fast. So, dopaminergic distraction can be quite stimulating. And because, it's so stimulating, we want to crave more distraction as a result. But one of the best ways that I've found for finding calm, for finding deliberateness, for moving to that calm side of the anxiety spectrum really is that stimulation fast. And so, the term used for this is a dopamine fast often, but it's a bit of a misnomer, because we can't really fast from dopamine any more than we can fast from like carbohydrates.
Right.
We need dopamine. Our body relies on dopamine for its basic bodily functions. But what we can fast from are the empty sources of dopamine that we engage with because something provides us with a dopamine hit. And so the more novel something is, the more dopamine that it's likely to provide us with. So novelty, salience, so how much something directly affects our life, and genetics are the 3 factors that determine the size of a hit we get from something. But because novelty matters so much, we can kind of determine the height of stimulation that something brings us to when we engage with it by ranking the different things that we engage with by how novel they are. And so at the very height, the zenith of stimulation might be checking social media, for example, which is built around novelty. And not only that, but personalized novelty, where an algorithm learns as much about us as it possibly can. It tailors content to that is most likely to be stimulating, and usually using artificial intelligence so that it keeps us hooked, even though when we reflect back on that time, we don't really think of it as meaningful. It kind of creates a satisfactional emptiness after. So social media at the very top. Then below that, we keep working our way down in heights of stimulation and how novel something is to the things at the bottom. Meditation is near the bottom. Bookkeeping is near the bottom, right? The boring things, the things we put off. Writing is closer to the bottom, but probably not quite there. And the different things we engage with have different heights of stimulation that they lead us to fly at. And the higher our height of stimulation, typically the more stress we experience, because those things are more stressful, even though they're kind of a comfortable and familiar source of chronic stress. The Instagram is a good example of this. It still makes us compare ourselves to other people. Frances Hogan, the Facebook whistleblower, said Instagram is basically about 2 things: bodies and comparing lifestyles. It's hard to imagine what fires up the comparison part of our mind more than that. But with a stimulation fast, essentially we choose a duration of time. I recommend doing about a month, which sounds high, but is quite enjoyable, actually, after you get through the first week or 2. And so what you do is you look at the activities that are at the upper band of this stimulation heights chart: the social media, the processed takeout food, anything that is essentially highly processed and manufactured in your life is likely to be more novel and dopaminergic, whether it's analog or digital. And by eliminating that upper band of activities over the course of the month, so deleting social media off your phone, deleting email off your phone so you can actually focus on it on a desktop computer, things like that, you lower your average height of stimulation. And so it becomes infinitely easier to focus on the things that are at the bottom of that chart. Bookkeeping becomes easy. Even meditation becomes easy. Writing becomes more natural. And you'll probably find that the things that you used to have no time for, like reading books and and meditation, for example, were really things that you didn't have the attention for because of that height of stimulation.
Right.
And it's wonderful. And identify hobbies you want to pick up during it. I learned to play the piano during my stimulation fasts. And I'm still pretty bad at it, but I'm making constant progress, and I don't really care because I enjoy it. And it's that mindset of lowering our average stimulation height that really gets us to a place where we can focus and become engaged with what we're doing. And ultimately, the end goal, savor our lives, actually enjoy our experiences more.
One thing I thought was so interesting in the book is that you said the more that we are consuming highly stimulating things in the digital world, the more we start to crave them in the analog world. So if you are living in a really lots of social media, lots of fast YouTube, you're probably also going to want to have more booze, more highly processed food.
Yeah.
I thought that was so interesting. And, it's funny, I'm hearing you describe that and you were like, you just lower your base of stimulation. And I was like, do I want that? I want you to sell me on it more. Tell me more about why that makes us happier when we have a lower threshold for stimulation, or maybe a greater tolerance for lack of stimulation.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think we do need to be sold on it a little bit. But, here's a simple example. So I was drinking a jasmine tea over the course of this spot, which is now done, unfortunately. So there are, two kind of people that might enjoy jasmine tea that could have a completely different experience when they sip on this. The first is somebody who is able to actually enjoy that experience. They're able to be present for it. They're able to focus on it. And because of that, they actually derive more satisfaction from it. Then there's somebody who's distracted during that time. They're thinking about something else. They can't fully enjoy that experience. And we have these beautiful moments of our life that we constantly gloss over. I remember going on a hike through a park with somebody, and they were on their phone the whole time. They weren't really present. They were worried about work, and they weren't really there in the park with me. Whereas I remember, going through this park a bit mindfully, actually, though the book is not about mindfulness, going through the park and soaking in everything, feeling like I could breathe through nature itself, as corny as that sounds. And I remember the delight that I had after. I don't know if you're into camping or hiking and you just feel like you're a part of nature. It's that universalism value that, we often don't find expressed in our life, but we always feel great when we're by the ocean or looking up at the stars and with nature itself. That's the difference that calm can make. We so often, let's say this is the most delicious cup of jasmine tea in the world. It doesn't matter how delicious it is if we experience it and don't derive any satisfaction from it. And so, there's a lot of people who experience these incredible lives. I would say most people listening to the podcast, maybe even, we have these incredible lives where we have so much to be grateful for. Everything from the people that we're surrounded with, to the food that we get to eat, to the Uber Eats, to the things at the higher levels of stimulation sometimes too, when we engage and indulge intentionally, in my opinion. One of the best ways of assuaging any guilt we experience from indulgence is to indulge intentionally binge watching, intentionally having a dopamine night every once in a while. But what good is a good experience if we can't enjoy it? This could be the most delicious cup of jasmine tea in the world, and if you don't enjoy it in the slightest, it might as well be the worst. And so life is like that too. We want to feel as though we can become embedded in our life and enjoy our life, enjoy the great experiences that make up for it. But when all we care about is stimulation and finding the next hit of dopamine that never truly leads us to feel as though we're satisfied in the moment, but only that we need to crave more of everything that we already have, we never feel satisfied. Right. And not in a good way, not in like an Alexander Hamilton kind of way, but in a good, enjoy your life kind of way. And I think that's the point of calm. The point of calm is to create the conditions, not only to be productive, which calm most definitely helps with, not only to contribute more, not only to live in accordance with our values so we find more meaning, but also to enjoy the fruits of it all, to enjoy the fruits of our productivity, our accomplishment, every component of our life. I think that's what it's about.
Oh, I love it. It's like the difference between striving for achievement versus allowing fulfillment.
Yeah, we feel we can blossom, as corny as that might sound, right?
No, it's great. Chris, I know people are going to listen to this and they're going to want more from you and to learn more and to read this book. Tell people how they can stay in touch with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on the pod. It was fun to hang out with you and chat. So my website is chrisbailey.com. You can find my newsletter, my podcast, my books there. The book that we've been chatting about today is called How to Calm Your Mind. My others are Hyperfocus and the Productivity Project, which are about how we can manage our attention and hyperfocus. To basically a book about mindfulness, disguised as a book on productivity. And the Productivity Project is about a year-long series of experiments that I did where I used myself as a guinea pig to become more productive. And How to Calm Your Mind is the latest. And it's about how calm not only helps us enjoy things, but also helps us become more productive, which I think is an underrated benefit and means there's a practical payoff for all of this. And so enjoyment plus productivity equals calm in terms of the benefits of this.
Beautiful. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation so much, and I'm so excited to read your other books and get you back on to talk about those. But thank you so much for sharing about how to become calmer. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to meet you.
You too. Hey, dude, thanks for listening. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you can get the next one. And by the way, if you rate and review this podcast, it really helps me get found by other people who need some goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. And be sure to connect and DM me at Una Duncan on Instagram and let me know what you thought of the episode. Chat soon.